How many times have you seen exactly this happen? You see someone post or comment online, and it is objectively wrong, right? It's not an opinion, it's if they knew how to use Google, they could know this was wrong in 10 seconds. And so someone, maybe you if you're feeling up for it, replies pointing this out. And the response is something along the lines of, from looking at your profile, your ex, tell me your ex without telling me your ex. You're the kind of person who also thinks X. You know, no counter-argument, no acknowledging the point being made, just enough performance of a response, whilst doing anything except addressing the point actually made. And sometimes you'll see two people go back and forth like this, just fallacy after fallacy after fallacy. And it's completely pointless. It makes you wonder why they are even doing this. And it's because I don't think it's about them wanting to win an argument, I think it's about them not wanting to lose one. But I'll come to that in a second. But firstly, if you feel the same, you feel like this is all you see online, you're not alone. Online discussion is essentially dead in most corners of the internet. There's this kind of vague shell of it left, right? People are sending messages and responses to each other, but they're not actually having a discussion. They don't want to talk to someone. They just want people to hear what they're saying and for other people, including themselves, to think that they're right. They've got zero interest in exploring whether they are or not. They just want to feel like they are. And I think we are all a little bit guilty of this to some extent, right? You know, I admit, sometimes someone says something dumb, and my first instinct is to look at their profile or like think something about them so that I can move on, right? Like we've all kind of done this. We've all fell into this to varying extents at some point, right? But let's get into why this happened, and especially why can nobody online just say those 3 words? I was wrong. What are these ridiculous phrases doing to the way we think and the way we argue? And why is discussion just dead? Well, I think there's 4 main reasons. Firstly, of course, is those damn phrases. There's a term for this, and it predates the internet by about 60 years. It's known as a thought-terminating cliché. The phrase comes from a psychiatrist named Robert J. Lifton, from a book about Chinese thought reform programs used by the CCP in the 40s and 50s, i.e. what most people would call brainwashing. Lifton noticed that certain phrases weren't being used to make an argument. They were being used to end one. Short, catchy, definitive sounding. Say the phrase and the conversation is kind of over. People feel like a point has been made, even when one actually hasn't, because as long as you don't think about it too hard, it seems to kind of address the point being made, right? And that likely sounds extremely familiar. Lifton was writing about political re-education camps, but that's not where they're used these days. Instead, it's used in online comment sections. If your ex just say so is one of those, and it works because it makes people feel like they're right with so little effort. For the person writing the comment, it doesn't take any real effort to come up with something like this. For example, someone might say, oh, I think the ultra-rich should be taxed more because they earn more than they could ever spend. A lot of that money comes through quite unfair practices, and the money would just be better spent elsewhere. Someone who disagrees could put together an argument for why they disagree, or they could just say, if you're poor, just say so. It has absolutely nothing to do with the point being made. It is not a counterpoint whatsoever, it's just someone imagining that this person is poor, and that's why they think what they do. It feels very comfortable to them because in their heads they can just go, well, everyone who disagrees with me is just X. And this really spirals out of control because anyone who disagrees can see the counterpoint in quotation marks and then completely dismiss the original post. They can just scroll past it without ever having to reflect or consider on why they might be wrong. You know, they'll be thinking, oh yeah, I'm right to disagree with higher taxes for the ultra-rich, because as that guy said, oh, they're all just jealous or whatever, right? You've seen this 100 times before. People like to think they're right, especially when it comes to very charged topics like this. And they especially like to see other people confirm that they're right. And as an extension to that, people really do not like nuance. They don't like to get into the details of things. Perhaps because they just have a lot of other things going on in their life, but a lot of people just want their simple black and white, us and them type thinking. You can see how that was essential for survival for a lot of human existence, right? To be able to quickly see people as either ally or foe with no in between, not sort of stopping to think about, oh, but what about this, what about that, right? We're also, of course, naturally wired to take the path of least resistance. And with attention spans getting shorter and shorter and people struggling more and more to break away from just the very easy dopamine that they used to, having to dive into nuance feels a lot more difficult than just the simple black and white answer. For instance, a similar example, someone who disagrees that there's a cost of living crisis or that people aren't being paid enough will often just say something like, oh, people spend too much, they just waste too money, and that's every single person who's struggling with money, it's their own fault. Now sure, that's kind of the case for some people, but if you try to respond with claims that go a level deeper, that explain why that's not the case for everyone, that wages haven't increased anywhere near as fast as housing prices, that the average CEO to worker pay has drastically increased over the years. No matter how much evidence you show someone, they may never want to accept this true because then it becomes a more complicated issue than just dismissing it entirely with this very broad stroke of it's all their fault. And of course, they might even have to admit that they're wrong. Shock horror, right? That Lord forbid. You know, as you probably noticed, people don't like doing that, right? Not at all. You know, I think I can count on, I'm 27. I think I can count on one hand and all the thousands of comments and posts I've seen, the amount of times I've seen someone admit that they were wrong. And that is including the most mundane stuff like whether Raichu or Charizard is better in Pokemon right now. Let alone like heavier real world issues, right? Is Raichu, by the way. Anyway, I think this comes from people assuming that if they do, the other person is going to be like a complete arse about it, right? Because again, as you've definitely noticed, people are extremely hostile online right now, right? They're very quick to jump down someone's throat. It's almost like the default stance that people go into any kind of disagreement with. Someone says something, people are very quick to give a very hostile response to it, and if someone replies to them, it very quickly becomes more and more hostile, right? But as one of the rare people that can actually admit, yeah, I'm kind of a dumbass sometimes, and has actually said to people, oh yeah, you're right, I missed that, I'm actually wrong on that. You'll be surprised that if you're civil to someone, even if they're like hostile currently, if you end that and you give a civil response, quite often people are civil back, right? I think a lot of people are just hostile because they assume the other person is going to be as well. And this, of course, leads me into the final part of this video, which is, what can we actually do about this? Right, and firstly, as mentioned, don't give in to this. Don't give in to that urge to look at someone's profile and find something to make a quick jab back at them, right? Don't join this nonsense of doing anything but addressing the point being made. And secondly, if someone is doing that, just call them out on it, right? Call them out on the fact that they clearly don't have a point to make because they're doing anything but that, right? And this is all we can do. Just stop giving into this like arms race of gotchas, right? Bring some resemblance of discussion back into the world. Now, unfortunately, I don't think this is ever really going to go away, especially because when people create content that have these like quick little gotchas, it's so much more digestible, it's so much easier to understand. People prefer that, right? People would prefer a 15-20 second little reel of someone making a comment that doesn't actually really make sense when you stop to think about it, right? People would prefer that to a 10-minute video kind of breaking down like all the kind of ins and outs of everything. So unfortunately, it's not going to go away. People are going to keep watching the much shorter, more kind of snappy, nonsense content, and they will base a lot of their beliefs off that without ever really challenging them properly. But just don't join it. And also, don't think you're above it, right? I think this is a trap a lot of us, again, myself, fall into. We think that's not us, right? Everyone watching this is thinking, oh, that's not me, I don't do that. We all kind of do, right? Do you really stop everything you see, especially when it supports your, your viewpoints? do you really stop and think, well, actually, does it? Now that I think a bit more, more about it, is that actually creating a point? Or is it just this kind of like out of context thing that kind of makes sense in a vacuum, but if you really stop and think about it, it doesn't, right? Because you'll have seen plenty of those that you disagree with, and you can think of why you disagree with them. But do the same for the stuff you agree with, right? And it might be nothing. You might think about it and, there's nothing, right? But at least stop and think about it. Don't think you're above any of this, because I'm not. I do this all the time. That's why I made this video, So anyway, this was a bit of a ramble, bit of a rant. This is something I've been wanting to get off my chest for a long, long time. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again soon.